Yeah. Lady Justice in the house.
Keeping the balances of justice level with the light of liberty shining bright.
You're so silly.
What?
Yeah. Right.
One of the people met and had a very interesting conversation with this officer. So much so that one thing led to another, that led to another, that led to, well, what I would say was a very meaningful communication. I'll let this video speak for itself.
People. Don't call me an individual.
Okay, so
I'm one of the people, right? The people have rights.
Okay.
Like we the people. The right of the people to bear arms. Right?
I agree with you. 100%.
Right. But you are a servant of the people. So we're both humans, but we're not the same kind of human. Right? The Constitution defined, like, okay, before there was the Constitution, all the framers came from England. Right? Britain.
I believe so.
Well,
You have to educate me on that.
okay, let's not say all of them, just because I hate the word all of them. But nevertheless, majority of them came from England. And they had three words that I'm sure you're familiar with. Royalty, nobility, and peasants. Right? They had the king or the queen. They had duchesses and dukes, just like they have now. Right? And then they had nobility, the rich upper class. And then they had peasants. Right? And they were all humans. But they weren't all the same. Right? They didn't all have rights. They didn't all have the same privileges. Right? And so the Constitution came along and they used three different words. People, persons, and citizens. And they're not all the same. They're all humans, but the Constitution was based on a system where not all humans had rights. And we know this because there were slaves. Right? And slaves didn't have rights, did they?
No, they did not.
And neither did women.
No.
And neither did children.
So can you see the change that we've gone through in history?
Well, whether there's been a change in history, it hasn't changed the meaning of people, person, and citizen. Right? It hasn't changed the fact that they're not the same. They're not interchangeable. Right? Because people had rights, and those rights could not be abridged, could not be infringed, could not be denied. Right? But slaves, on paper, were not called people. They were called persons. Right? And so on paper, okay, nobody's rights got taken because persons didn't have rights. People have rights. But slaves were not considered people. Right? Only the people had rights. You see, so you can't just go in 240 years later say that people and person are the same thing. Or, a citizen is, well, the 14th Amendment says what a citizen is. It's any person born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the authority thereof.
You know what?
What you got?
I'm big on the amendments.
Sure.
To the Constitution. I'm big on that.
Well, amendment doesn't mean right. I'm glad you brought that up.
It's the amendments to the Bill of Rights.
No. The Bill of Rights is what the first 10 amendments were called.
Okay.
But that's just a title. Right? And titles don't control what it is. Okay? And that title wasn't even transferred to the Constitution. Those were transferred as amendments, and amendments does not mean rights. Okay, the word right, when they used the word right, it was a right. And when they didn't use the word right, it wasn't a right. They knew how to say what was a right and what wasn't a right. Right? So, like, commonly you'll hear the right to remain silent. Okay, but that's not really a right. It's a privilege. Okay, and you know it's a privilege because, one, they didn't call it a right. And two, because there's a qualifier at the end of it, right? You have the right to remain silent if it may incriminate you. And what
You know what?
will
You want to
incriminate
interpret that? Do you want to interpret rights versus
Privileges.
Privilege?
Yeah, but privileges still cannot be denied. I'm not saying privileges are garbage, but they're still privileges, not
This
rights.
is a really good conversation because I love politics. I love talking. These are good educated
Yeah,
conversations.
these are good educated
Very, very good.
conversations.
But
Yeah,
you got me sparked an idea real quick.
I got you sparked an idea. All right. I'll sit down to that.
So,
Yeah. Are you pulling up the Constitution?
what's that?
Are you pulling up the Constitution?
Yes, I am.
Oh,
Okay.
man. You're golden.
Because I do love this stuff.
I wish more officers were like you. I have this conversation with a lot of officers.
Okay,
Some of them get it. Some of them...
What's
it's
your
just
name?
good. Well, it's not nice to call people names.
Well,
See,
can I
I'm one of
introduce-
the people.
Can I introduce myself?
Yeah,
My
absolutely.
name is Wes.
Wes.
Yes, sir.
Very nice to meet you.
This is
Yeah.
Charles.
Charles. Nice to meet you, too. Yeah.
If we
I
have
don't
to
mean
take
any
a vote-
disrespect by that. It's just not nice to call people names, and you're a servant of the people.
Okay. Well,
Right.
thank you for letting me introduce myself.
Yeah.
If we take a call, please excuse us.
You got to do what you got to do, you know?
So, okay, so no state shall make or enforce any law. Hold on, sorry, my phone's messed up.
Is that the 10th Amendment? Wait, what are you reading?
14th Amendment.
Oh, It's a long amendment.
Yeah. The privileges or immunities of a citizen. Of
Yes,
the United
notice that's not rights and powers. It says privileges and immunities.
States. Right. Nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property.
Which
is
are
kind of
also privileges.
privileges. Now you're talking about rights in the Fifth Amendment.
There's no rights in the Fifth Amendment.
Okay.
Because the word right does not appear in the Fifth Amendment.
What I want to do, if you allow me, I just want to look at what the Fifth Amendment actually
Yeah,
articulates.
yeah. Go ahead. And it doesn't use the word people either. It's talking about persons.
So they were talking about the militia. Let me see here.
Oh, that's the Second Amendment or the Third Amendment.
See, let's say we make an arrest, right?
Uh-huh.
We are required by law to give someone their Miranda rights.
Yes.
And they call it a Miranda right.
Well,
Based
now
on,
it's called a Miranda warning, I hear.
It's good.
Right?
It's good. I like this guy.
I didn't just wake up yesterday.
Yeah, so it's right. It's a warning.
Yes, and warnings are definitely not rights, okay? I mean, just think about it. The idea of somebody else being required to read them to you, that's not a right,
Okay, so what
okay?
happens
That
is,
can't be a right.
So what happens is when you're reading the Miranda warning, right?
Mhm.
What you're doing is you're legally telling the person that you have in custody that when this goes to court, you have the privilege to remain silent.
Privilege.
You don't have to say anything.
Yeah,
Because
if
you,
it will incriminate you. But
if-
you do have to say some things.
like what?
Your name,
To identify.
because it's been determined by the courts that that will not incriminate you.
No, it shouldn't. It shouldn't. What we
It
have to
shouldn't,
do-
right? But that's the qualifier at the end of that. Remember, you have the right to remain silent if it will incriminate you. You don't have the right to remain silent any and all times.
Should we read it verbatim?
Yeah,
Let's read it.
absolutely. That'd be great. I mean, the Fifth Amendment doesn't even say that.
No,
It just
we'll
says
have to
you
go to the Miranda warning. It's a case law.
will not be required to bear witness against yourself or something like that. I think it says bear witness.
The Fifth Amendment is very powerful, and that gives you rights to go to court. When you're being accused of a crime, but you are presumed innocent until you are proved guilty by members of the community. When you have a jury or a judge.
In title only, you're actually presumed a defendant immediately.
I know. Well, I want to talk to this guy real quick.
You're presumed a defendant. Okay, you're not presumed innocent. That's
So-
just nonsense. And those are
Verbatim.
titles.
You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will is the important. Can and will be used against you.
Yeah,
in court of law.
that's not the Fifth Amendment. That's
No,
the
this
Miranda
is the
warning.
Miranda one. Right.
Yeah, but see, the people, they have the right not to make speech under the First Amendment. They don't need a Fifth Amendment. The Fifth Amendment is for persons. The people have the right to provide for the common defense, right?
Under a
But,
peaceful process in the First Amendment. You say we're talking about.
well, that is one way, The press is another way.